This is the Black Experience for all. Ben Wilson is chairman of Beveridge Diamond. Mr. Wilson is a leader on ethics, compliance, and diversity and inclusion. Under his leadership, the firm has been recognized as an Environmental Practice Group of the Year by Law 360 for 2 years in a row, and named Environmental Firm of the Year by U.S. News Best Lawyers. In terms of the Justice Department, did you feel that you sort of covered, the importance of that experience, in your life full enough, sir?
Well, I would say yes. I think the only point I would add, it was there that I learned to practice law, and in a sense of learn to litigate, learn to try cases, learn to file, draft motions, learn how to conduct discovery. And so the nuts and bolts of litigation practice, I learned at the department. I have good teachers, good peers, and it helped me a great deal.
Okay. And so you decide to go to, it's Rose, Smith, Chapman, Duff,
and Hazley. When I joined, it was simply Chapman, Duff, and Paul.
Okay.
And as I mentioned, Oscar Chapman had been the Secretary of the Interior under Franklin Roosevelt. And it was a small firm, collegial. We lost a significant client of that firm, and we merged with a Pittsburgh firm. And, in retrospect, it's easy to see there was not a great deal of synergy there. But I became a partner at that firm, and I was grateful for that. That was an achievement that was very important to me. And again, the people were good people. The challenge was, the business side of the law, and it was about that time when I left them several weeks before. I fell and broke my neck. I think I told you that story, didn't I?
No.
Oh, all right. Well, forgive me, Adam. Then I should tell you that story. So, June of 1986, it was the day that Lynn Bias had the drug overdose. I think that was June 17, 1986. I was coming home late from work, and my sister-in-law worked at a law firm. My office was at 18th and I, and hers was at 15th and I. And I could park in her building. And I fell from a man lift, one of these moving ladders, and the distance between two floors. And of course, I was bleeding profusely. The parking attendant raced to get rags. Have you ever spilled a cup of tea or water on your mother's dining room table, and everyone rushes for napkins? That's how I was bleeding. Wow. And he was soaking them up. The blood was soaking up the rags. And I was trying to get up. And if you've ever seen a boxer knocked out, you think he's getting up to fight. He's just trying to regain his equilibrium. Mm-hmm. And they raced me to George Washington Hospital. I was in and out of consciousness, but I recall seeing a woman who had those electric pads on her chest, and she flopped up and down, and she didn't appear to survive. They were sewing up the back of my head like you might sew up a Raggedy Ann doll. And I'm one of these men, Adam, when he pricks his finger, he cries like a baby, washing the sharps in the kitchen. And now they're sewing up my head. And they took me, as I say, I was then in a hospital room at George Washington. I remember our daughter was 2 years old, and she came and she saw me. And you know how you don't know what you look like, but you can see yourself through the eyes of other people. And I think she thought she saw a monster. And so I didn't know what I looked like, but she was clearly afraid. And And that was a difficult time for me because for, I'd say, 30 to 36 hours, I could not move my legs. And I began my negotiation with God. And I said, God, I'd rather die if I can't be a father to my daughter. And Adam, father to me meant walking. Well, you can be a father without walking, but I didn't think so. And I had another request to make of God. I wanted to be a husband to my wife. And husband to my wife meant having sex. Yeah. And you can be a husband without having sex, but I was, 12 days from my 35th birthday. And wow. So those were the two things that I was praying for. And it wasn't that I wanted to die. I didn't want to go 15 rounds with Mike Tyson or even 5 seconds. I didn't want to walk out in front of a car, but I was no longer afraid to die. Yeah. And after maybe 36 hours or so, I think the swelling must have started to come down. I could move my legs. Pain was unbearable now. And I'm crying and I got snot coming out my nose. And the nurse comes in with morphine. She says, Mr. Wilson, you need to take this. It'll help you with the pain. I said, no, I think I should feel this pain for a little while. I'm grateful for the pain. And I know that may sound crazy, but for me, I was grateful that I could feel things. And of course, I'm a big chicken, so it didn't take long for me to cry uncle and take the shot. But I measure my life both before and after that accident. I think that changed me and humbled me and made me realize the world wasn't about me. I clearly was being saved for a reason. I just didn't know what that reason was or what that purpose was. So that was a defining moment for me. And probably within about 30 days of that, I was informed that I would likely have to be let go by my then law firm. And I remember the partners in the Chapman, Duff and Paul, the old firm, were saying, Ben, don't worry, when we meet with Mr. Big, when he comes to meet with us, we got your back. Well, they didn't say we got your back. That wasn't the expression then, but that was in effect what they were saying. And when he came, everyone was quiet. And he said, when I was at the University of Michigan, I played football. We didn't have players on the team who didn't play. And I said, well, when I played football, I scored touchdowns. But I get your point. You can't keep me here if we don't have any work. And I had this heavy neck brace on. And so my voice was very low, but I wanted him to hear me. And I said, last week, a client of this firm, not my client, who owes us $1 million, I got them some work. And they're writing the firm a check for $500,000. Is that worth something? Oh, and you could hear a rat do, on cotton. And so it got really, really quiet then. And then I said, and this week, and I can make my voice sound like it's cracking, this week I got my first client. And he banged the table like a judge. And he says, you're reinstated. And then all of a sudden, those guys who said they would speak up, Adam, who were quiet, spoke. They were like the voices of Babel, right? And he basically said, shut up. The way a commanding choir director or drill sergeant might direct disorderly troops or choir members. And they were immediately quiet. And I immediately began in earnest a search. And it wasn't the first time I'd looked, and I wrote several hundred law firms. And Beveridge Diamond is the one that made me an offer. Later, Adam, after I was there as a partner, we had a little box with all the letters from applicants from past years, and I couldn't resist. I decided, let me see if I wrote these guys. And I had twice before. someone had written, "This guy looks interesting. Maybe we should bring him in." But it was my third try, just one of several hundred letters I wrote, that they brought me in, and they brought me in 5 or 6 times for interviews with everyone, and they made an offer. I asked the then managing partner, I told him my situation. I said, do you think it would be better if I came in without the brace? And he said, yes. So I waited a few weeks, and I came in without the brace. I didn't want them to feel that I was anything other than able to do the work. And so that's how I came to Beveridge and Diamond. We represented a lot of cities across the country, and my opposing counsel thought I'd never been to New Haven, Connecticut before. We represented the city. They wanted to take the mayor's deposition. The mayor was Italian American, and so the assumption was made falsely that somehow he had some organized crime connection, and they wanted to take his deposition over Thanksgiving. About this time, it must have been 1986, and they were going to embarrass him. Well, he didn't know I'd been to New Haven, Connecticut. When I was at Dartmouth, we always played Yale at Yale. So I happened to know where the law school was. I went over there, I read my cases, and I beat the pants off the guy. The rule is that you don't have to take the deposition of a public figure like the president or a U.S. senator or a mayor unless they have knowledge peculiar to them. And there was no indication that this mayor had special knowledge that was not otherwise available. And the federal magistrate ruled in my favor, and thus began that work.
Okay. So I want to make sure that I understand what you were saying about Rose Schmidt and Duff and so on. Right. You had become a partner there.
Yes, I had.
And after you broke your neck, they felt that you wouldn't be able.
No, that's not fair. What happened was, in the meantime, we lost our most important client.
Okay.
Right. And that client did something that happens in Washington. There was a new governor elected in Puerto Rico, and the new governor took work from 10 different law firms, including our law firm, and gave it to Covington and Burley, which was an outstanding law firm. And it wasn't personal. It's just you get a new governor, he puts new people in charge of his matters.
Right.
But I went from being very busy to not having much work.
I see.
But of course, what was hard was I also had this broken neck. And the question was, what am I going to do? And if I was going to have to look for a job, I did not look the part because I had this heavy neck brace on my neck. I hope I'm answering your question.
Yes, no, you did. Okay. And how fearful were you that, I've never had a broken anything, thank goodness, but a broken neck. You said you didn't feel your legs for a few days. Were you fearful that you might not walk?
When I say a few days, it was hours, somewhere between 24 and 36 hours. Okay. Go ahead.
And you were, even when you got some of the feeling back, were you fearful that you might not be able to walk?
Less fearful. In other words, once I could move my legs, I felt like, oh man, this could be okay.
Okay.
Right? I could just worry about the regular things of the day,
And how long did it take you for your neck to heal, sir? Do you recall?
Well, I'd say I wore that brace for at least 30 days.
Okay.
It might have been 4 to 6 weeks. It was a heavy one, and then a soft cast, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
And it's one of those things where you see the fellow move like that. You can't turn your neck.
Right.
It holds it in place. And but so it was a confluence of bad luck. One, we lost this client, which was no one's fault. But two, it meant that I went from being the busiest guy to not having much of anything to do. Right.
Okay.
So it was not unreasonable to say, we love you, but we can't afford to keep you.
Right.
They weren't quite that gentle, but that's basically it. And so my response to that was to do what I'd always done, to try to be resourceful. And I helped the client get some work. And so they were in a position to pay us a bill that they owed us, a significant bill.
You said you applied to quite a few law firms.
Several hundred, yes.
Several hundred. And two things. One, now, were they all in Washington?
Yes, they were Washington based. My wife at that point was at Sidley in Austin, was doing very well. And I thought I would be attractive to, on the outside. Again, I'd done very well at the Department of Justice. I'd received there are 2 awards that they give, a special achievement and outstanding something or other. And I'd earned those back to back and consecutive years. And so, I had a very high caseload, very confident of what I could do. So you may recall I described myself before as looking good in my uniform, but I couldn't do anything.
Right.
Now I knew how to fight. I didn't just look the part. I was the part. And that's a different kind of approach to the work and to the problem. And so when I went back into the private sector, I was ready. And
there was no thought about staying at Justice, sir?
Well, if I can be very honest with you, I wanted to go back to private practice. I had not proven that I could do that. You may recall I indicated when I was in school, that was a bias. That's where you wanted to be. And I wanted to prove that I could do that in this area where people of color were not succeeding, not because of their failings. I was no smarter than those who preceded me or my contemporaries, but I wanted to go back to prove that I could do this. And that's what I wanted.
Yeah.
And so
that was it. Yes. I know how competitive you say that you are.
Yes.
I'm curious, did you, in part of being competitive, your classmates at Harvard Law, are you kind of keeping an eye on what they're doing and sort of?
I was aware of what others were doing, that's for sure. But it wasn't just keeping up with them. I had my own standard, In other words, I believe I was harder on myself than any teacher I had, any coach I had, any competitor that I had. I felt ultimately I was competing against myself. And the point was, have I done my best? Is this the best product that I can deliver? But the first thing, and I would have to remind myself sometimes, it wasn't about me. Have I acted in the interest of my client? Have I furthered their interests? And so that's really where a lot of that was. And I don't regret it. It's everybody makes a decision, and
So obviously with Mrs. Wilson doing well, you say there's no chance that you're going to leave Washington. So you've got to find.
Well, there's always a chance. We wanted to make it there. We were members of the Georgia bar. We were members of the DC bar. If we were going to go somewhere else, we would have to take a bar exam, right? And we'd have to start all over again.
Okay.
And so a lot of this is you want to make your mark. And to my wife's credit, she had gone south to Georgia, and she passed up an opportunity to work with Judge Higginbotham to be with me. And she was doing well at her firm when I left my firm, when I was not doing well. So all credit to her.
Yeah.
And here she was doing well at a second firm. So the last thing I wanted to do was to say, you need to change because somehow things aren't working out for me.
Yeah.
And so,
okay.
no, this was it.
So at that moment when you got accepted at Beveridge and Diamond, and it maybe also a little bit in retrospect, why did you think that was a good fit for you, sir?
Well, it's a great question, and there's a story in that. I had one other offer, an offer from another firm that offered me $25,000 a year more than Beveridge and Diamond. And $25,000 may not seem like a lot of money, but in 1985 or 86, whatever the year was, that was a whole lot of money.
Yeah.
And the other firm said, if you come with us, you don't have to develop any clients. We have all the business in the world, right? And I was leaving a firm that was having difficulty because we did not have enough business.
Mm-hmm.
And Beveridge and Diamond said, we're going to give you 3 years, right? And if you do well, you stick with us. If you don't, you don't. That's reduced to, now they said it in a much nicer way than that, but that was the testing period. And innately, I knew that the key for me was to be able to develop my own clients. I didn't know how to do that, Adam. I had no clue. There was no book for me to read, but I knew this is what I needed to do, or else I would be forever working on someone else's business, dependent and beholden on someone else. And I didn't want that.
Yeah.
And so I took less money, and I would argue in some sense, a harder hill to climb, because I felt the reward ultimately would be greater.
Okay.
And I would have that independence.
So as you were debating these two situations,
yes,
and I assume Mrs. Wilson was one of your counselors?
She was the counselor. Yes, no question. And
tell me what she was thinking, sir.
Well, now you never know 100% of what another person is thinking, right, Adam? But suffice it to say, my wife was my biggest cheerleader, particularly when things were difficult. Mm-hmm. And she believed that I could do this. I just needed a chance. Mm-hmm. And I had a younger brother. He wrote me a beautiful note. He said, you were the best leader I've ever known. Mm-hmm. If that firm doesn't want you, somebody else will.
Yeah.
And now this is a brother. I don't know if you have siblings, but sometimes with your siblings, you argue and you fuss and you fight. And my brother and I did that all the time.
Yes.
But he was sensitive to what was gnawing at me the most, and, knowing that I had this ability, but not either showing it or having the opportunity to show it, not having the opportunity to make a mistake and come back from a mistake, mm-hmm. the way other people sometimes had that chance. So, no, there were people who were for me in my family, and I just had to do that. Adam, I'll never forget, there was a guy I went to college with, and he said to me, Ben, I thought you would be this great success. And here you are over, at that time I was at the Department of Justice. And I won't tell you, I was so angry. I wished I was back in college and I could, appropriately hit him at practice or something like that, And but I had to use that anger as fuel to do the things that I needed to do to get better. And that's a hard part in life. You can be frustrated about failure. You can be frustrated about your situation, the unfairness of it. But that really wasn't going to change it. What I had to make certain I did was listen to the criticism, assume it to be legitimate, irrespective of its motivation, and succeed anyway.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's kind of that was the mindset that I adopted. And so when I got to Beveridge and Diamond, the big case that I worked on at Chapman Duff and Paul was an environmental case. And we represented the Puerto Rico Aqueduct and Sewer Authority, and they were the number one target of EPA. And they had an engineer who was the highest paid engineer on the island who wrote a negative report every quarter. And I developed the idea that we should write a report in response, not saying we were perfect, but talking about the things that we did well, things we weren't doing so well, and what we were going to do about them. Because I wanted the judge to know we weren't just sitting there. And I didn't want my client to always be in a defensive posture. I wanted us to be able to score even on defense. Okay. And so that was a mindset. And so when I went to Beveridge and Diamond, and that matter in New Haven was a success. We got more work.
So let me ask you this. Ask you this. Several things. When you were making that decision between plus 25 grand and Beveridge Diamond, did you feel that you were at sort of at a crossroads, sir, in terms of?
Oh, yes, no question. Okay. No question. This was a defining moment, you know. At this point, let's see, I must have been 34 years old, almost 35 is what I was. And so, you know, the question is, where are you going to make your stand, you know? And that was another thing. I didn't feel that I could simply run to find the perfect place. I was going to have to make the most of whatever this next opportunity was. And if I was going to be good in private practice, I knew I'd have to demonstrate not only the ability to do the work, Adam, I was comfortable I could do that based upon my experience at the Department of Justice. But now I needed to know that I could go get the work. I could bring the work into the door.
So now there's the next question. So right. How does that work? I worked at Merrill Lynch, and you had to go cold calling to find clients. I mean, how does a lawyer with your pedigree, how do you go about building a client base when you've never done it before, sir? What does that mean?
Well, it means you have to, when you meet people, you have to remember who they are. You have to remember things about them and their families. You have to have done your homework to know as much as you can about their business. And you have to figure out who are they using now and come up with a differentiating argument. Why should we use you? What makes you different? You see, Adam, everywhere I turned, there were good-looking guys like you with a nice tie and a dark jacket. And like you, some of them were better looking than me. And like you, some of them were smarter than me. No. And so I had to figure out what makes me different, what makes me special. And you had to learn that. And what happened was I would have these small successes and they would build on each other and it helped build a reputation. But the key for me was, I think, being helpful to others who chose later that they would be helpful to me. So about 80% of my clients were women and 80% of them were women of color. And so, Adam, you should say to me, well, Mr. Wilson, I can see you. It's not your looks. And I've been talking to you for a couple hours now. It's not your intelligence. And you're right, Adam.
No.
It's certainly neither of those things. But what happened was I think women know what it means to make a statement in a meeting, have it ignored. 5 minutes later, a man says the same thing and it's treated like manna from heaven.
Yeah.
And so I was respectful. I listened. And then not only did I ask for something for myself, I also asked, what can I do to be helpful to you? Mm. And when I started back then, I had 2 names on the list. Who might send me work if I were to ask them? Today, I have over 2,500 names. Alpha order by city, by state, by company, by agency. And so I'll never forget, I was arranging a meeting with a major company in New York City. And this is before emails. I think we had fax. And I must have made 10 calls. Hello, Mr. Kennedy. Ben Wilson, I was hoping we could meet. Sure, Ben. What's a good date for you, Mr. Kennedy? Let me check my schedule. I'll get back with you. I said, sure. May I call you in a couple of days if I've not heard back? Sure. Haven't heard back. Mr. Kennedy, Ben Wilson again. Who? Yeah, I'm the guy who, yes, sir. Okay, well, how about next Tuesday, the 15th? Of course, that's the day before the holiday. Oh, no, sir, that's fine. It could have been anything. Yeah. And nothing was going to keep me from going. And then, so I did that. And I'll never forget, the senior partner said to me, now do it 5 times. I felt like the 98-pound weakling who's done a pull-up. And the guy that looks like Superman says, do 5 of them.
Yeah.
I did it 50 times that year.
Wow.
You know what motivated me? When the guy said, do it 5 times, what he was really saying, look, you 98-pound weakling, you can't do it 5 times. And I said, I got your 5 times right here. I did it 50. And I didn't say that to him, but I thought. And I kept a score.
Yeah.
And a little scorecard, who I met, when I met them, time, date. I had to learn what I had in common with the other person. Maybe there was a team that we liked. Maybe we had an interest in Civil War history. Maybe we had an interest in writers. But what did that other person care about? And we would talk, and I would listen. And
let me ask, Ben, yes. How did you've had mentors throughout your life. Yes. As you're trying to build this client list and you come upon women and women of color, was there anyone, did you just sort of figure that out on your own, or was there someone who kind of guided you in that direction then?
Well, so I had great mentors at different points in my life. Some of them were mentors and didn't even know it. So I met Vernon George several times in my life. The first time I met him was a day after Jimmy Carter had been elected, and he was at our law firm to meet with Mr. Carter's chief advisor, a guy named Charles Curbo.
Okay.
And I was thrilled to see him. And he knew me. He knew of my dad. You know, he's one of those guys who knew everybody. And he was as surprised to see me as I was to see him. But there was a great pleasure in that. I followed his career throughout, and at various points I would see him. Well, one time near the end of his life, he actually called me, was very complimentary of some of the things that I was doing. And I didn't think that he really had any idea who I was. Larry Thompson was a friend. He came to my first firm about 8 months after me, and Larry was 4 or 5 years older than me. So he had a maturity. He had a life before law school, a maturity that I didn't have.
Mm-hmm.
And he was smart. He was tough. And I listened to his way of thinking and, the importance of building your own practice. There were other people. There's John Daniels, terrific guy. He was a couple years ahead of me in law school. But he also had a life, I think, between college and law school. Came from a remarkable family in business and religion and all aspects of life in Milwaukee. And so he was very positive. But my wife was really the most, the key person in all of this. And, she was determined to succeed. And I think I told you that story about her father finding her studying all night. Did I tell you? Yes.
Yeah.
So she had that will, and we challenged each other.
Okay.
And I had peers who were going through that same thing. None of us knew anything about it. We were all learning at the same time. And we'd each share kind of our information, our intelligence, if you will. And so that's how it happened. And keep
So I'm
pushing me, though. I want to be sure I'm answering your question.
Yeah, no, you are. Thank you, Ben. So I'm curious, Mr. 98-pound weakling.
Yeah.
You get told, you get called out to do 5 and you
Right.
do 50.
Right.
I can assume your boss's jaw dropped to the floor. What was that? What was that like?
Well, I think he was one of the first ones to see the potential in what I could do. And I think he saw that all along, in fairness to him. But again, I would speak to people. They would say, and even today, when I speak to them now, they'll come to me and talk about building a practice. And I'll say, look, I bait 50 lines. And they'll say, Mr. Wilson, you can't eat 50 fish. And I'll say, but I'm not going to catch 50. I'm going to catch 23. Mr. Wilson, you can't eat 23. I said, you're right, but I've got a deep freezer and I've got aunts and uncles and brothers and sisters and cousins. And guess what? They all like fish. The point here was the clients, but more than the clients, the relationships I would develop would help me, but they might help my friend Adam. So let's say I met a friend who does labor and employment. My firm does not do that. But if Adam does, and Adam's a great guy, I'll say, you should speak to my friend Adam Kennedy. And my theory was, if they like me, I know they'll like Adam. And guess what they did?
Yeah.
And then the other thing that happened, I would try to help that in-house counsel. They had ambition. What can I do to advance within my organization? I would find opportunities for them to speak on panels and programs so they can tell their story, an opportunity to write an article, right? And when I learned of job opportunities, I didn't save it and put it in the safe. I shared it, right? And when someone was looking for a job and they couldn't find something, I helped them find it. And you know what they did? Almost without fail. They either tried to hire me, or if they did something that I didn't do, they would introduce me to the person within the company that did what I do.
Wow.
And they'd say, Ben's a great guy. You should talk to him. He can help you with. That's what we used to call a testimonial back home. Yeah. I tried it and it made my hair grow. And that helped me. So that's really how that started. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I guess this may be a bit of a loaded question.
Oh, and one other thing, you asked me, where did that come from? I wish I could tell you I learned that at Dartmouth College or Harvard Law School, but I learned it in my little old Sunday school in Jackson, Mississippi. We called it the Golden Rule. So even today, when I say, geez, I don't want to do this, or I don't want to call this guy back. And I'd say, well, how would I want someone to treat me? And the answer is, I want him to call me back. I want him to tell me he can't do it at this time. I want him to tell me when he could. Right. And so the Golden Rule has guided me. And I didn't learn that in New England, right? I learned that in Jackson, Mississippi. And so
okay, well, two things. Yeah, let me just say, because that's one of the things when I was fortunate enough to interview former 4-star Marine Corps General Tony Zinni and former 3-star Army General Kip Ward about Colin Powell. Yeah, right. That was the whole thing about Colin Powell, is that idea that the Golden Rule, and that you could he could walk into a room and there'd be a private, and he'd make that private feel fantastic, and he could go into a room and talk to the president of whatever country, and the exact same thing, and it's treat people the way you wanted to be treated, right? I mean, that's what you're talking about. And but I'm curious, Ben, is that how common is that approach in a law firm, especially in a large law firm?
Well, it's not as common as it ought to be, not just in the law, but anywhere.
Yeah.
See, that was a thing that I had to learn. There was a play that said, everything you need to know I learned in kindergarten. And, if you want a friend, be a friend. Right. follow the golden rule. These really kind of fundamental, if you make a promise, keep a promise, right? All those kind of basic things that we all take for granted.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not common enough, and certainly in that era in law firms. And but the other thing, I made a resolution that I would try to do the right thing, no matter what another person said or did. And I would not, I just resolved I was going to do the right thing. You know, at my first law firm, I don't know if I told you this story. I was at a meeting. We met every Friday. There were 90 lawyers. And this elderly gentleman talked about his grandfather had been in the Civil War, and it was raining so bad it wasn't safe for horses, dogs, or N-words. Did I tell you that story?
No.
Yes. And that was another time where you could hear a rat piss on cotton. It got real quiet. And after the meeting, I went upstairs and I spoke to him. And I told him I didn't appreciate what he said, and that wasn't so much that offended me, but he was talking about my people. And it's these people that you're talking about who made sacrifices for me to be here.
Mm-hmm.
He begged my forgiveness and all of that. And you know how people realize they're not going to live forever. And I said, well, that's something else you'll have to resolve elsewhere. But I just want you to know that's just not the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't trying to embarrass a 90-year-old man or however old he was, but I also didn't feel I could be silent and not make certain he understood directly from me why that was a problem. And there were others that were embarrassed. No one said anything, but they heard what I heard. And
Yes.
so another time I had a colleague, I won't tell you where, and he had a client who was perhaps engaging in some activity that was not appropriate. And the guy said, look, Ben, you should, wouldn't it help you if you remembered things a certain way? And they took me to a place for lunch, and it was a steak place. It must have cost $25 for that steak. And I generally carried a sandwich to work. And I remember writing a check for my $25 steak. And I said, look, I want to make it at this place, but I don't want to make it that badly. A lot of people made a lot of sacrifices for me. And but there's certain things that I'm not going to trade on. And so, Adam, I think the other thing that I learned growing up, not at Dartmouth College or Harvard Law School, was there's certain things that you don't compromise. Mm-hmm. And your integrity, your honesty, people ought to be able to count on what you say.
Yes.
Even if it means that you will not get the promotion that you want, and even if it can impact you. But I had this confidence. I don't know what it was based on, but there might be something better for me. But words like my brother's words, the confidence that my wife had in me, those were the things that helped sustain me. And so that's what happened. And so over the other thing was just this plain old perseverance. Mm-hmm. So people would go to a conference where you would meet potential clients, and if something didn't happen the first time, they didn't come back. I came back every year, and I went to every possible conference, and I got the cards. I built this list I'm telling you about, mm-hmm. you know, and I met people. And if I was going to go to a meeting, I'd try to find out who was there. I'd do a scouting report. I still do it today, to learn as much as I can about that other person and figure out what is it that we have in common. Mm. And sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong. Yeah. But that's what I attempted to do. And I can tell you one story. There was a young man from Guyana by way of New Jersey, and he was without a job. He just finished his third year in law school, and he wanted to go to New Jersey. He had a great work ethic. And this list, I had about 500 names at that time, about 35 companies in New Jersey, and he wrote to all of them. And he got a job with what was at the time the largest company in the world, AT&T. But he was the 31st environmental lawyer. In sports parlance, he was 31st string. And my wife's firm, Sidley and Austin, had represented them since Alexander Graham Bell first picked up the telephone. So the chance of me getting work was slim and none. But an interesting thing happened. The largest company in the world at the time became three companies: Lucent, NCR, and AT&T. And numbers 1 through 30 either took an early retirement or they went to Lucent or NCR. And number 31 became number one. Guess who he hired to do all the environmental work for the largest company in the world? Me. And then they invented something called a cell phone. And he hired me over there at AT&T Wireless. And then he went to an oil and gas company. He hired me there. And he went to another company in Texas, and he hired me there. So following the golden rule led to 4 clients in the top 30. 2 of them were in the top 10. One was in the top 5.
And these are your clients?
These are my clients.
Okay.
And so that's one person. Now, I could tell you that story several hundred times over.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
But that Larry Thompson, wonderful man. He's asked to be the monitor on the Volkswagen Dieselgate scandal. And someone recommends one of my colleagues at Beveridge Diamond. And Larry says, Beveridge Diamond, that's Ben Wilson. I'm calling Ben. That was the largest matter in the history of our firm. Over 20 people working full time on that. And it was an amazing case.
Yeah.
Before that, I worked on the Duke Energy coal ash spill. That was coal ash is the residue from coal that they burn to make electricity, and it spilled into the Garden of Eden River that separates Virginia from North Carolina. And the court appointed me the monitor. And when we're going through the interview, the judge says, I just told the judge I'd like to save a few minutes for closing. There's no closing, Adam. And so he says, do you know anybody in this room? And I said, yes, sir. That's the top lawyer for Duke. I met with her about a week ago, and that's her outside counsel. And there were 2 women on the right, one of whom had an Indian surname, and the other is an African-American woman. And earlier that day, this young woman had smiled at me as she passed, young black woman. I knew her from somewhere, but I wasn't sure. Now he's asking me, do I know them? And I said, well, I've seen Ms. Rajmaran's picture in the paper. And Miss Pettis, I'm sure she's forgotten me. Now I've deduced. I said, but she and I had breakfast. We talked about her career. And she smiled again. And so at the end, the judge gave me this few minutes for closing. And I said, Your Honor, this is my law firm was made for a case like this. You're talking about clean water. You're talking about other environmental damage. I sat across the street at the courthouse and I saw people handling their wills and getting a divorce and paying their child support. And I said, it's Friday afternoon, but tomorrow night there's a single mother with 3 children, and she can't go to the Piggly Wiggly or the Food Line and buy that fancy water. She has to trust the water that comes out the faucet, and she can't trust it anymore. She's going to put her 6-year-old daughter in the water, and then her 3-year-old son is going to bathe in the same water, and she's going to bathe the baby in the kitchen sink. And, environmental law is different. Any other law, it's not about just beating the brains out of your opponent. It's about trying to find a solution to a problem. And if you choose to have me, I'll give you everything I got on this case. I said, 100 years ago, a family that bears the same name in this company, Duke, gave money to the state and they built reservoirs. And that allowed North Carolina, after the war, after the Civil War, to develop these facilities, recreational and business purposes. Now a company that bears that same name is responsible for this problem. Mm-hmm. You haven't asked me, I'm busy, but if you have me, I'll give you everything I got on this case. Adam, I thought he was going to hug me. And he hired us. And that led to Volkswagen. So, I've had some amazing cases. Another case I had involved a deaf woman and her 4 children. Her husband was choked to death by campus police officers. And on the campus of Gallaudet University, the National University for the Deaf, these officers could not sign. And the husband had gotten to an argument with a professor who called the campus police officers, and 4 were walking him off campus. They had 4 children. She had what I guess they call white blonde hair. It's silver gray. Mm-hmm. And 2 of her deaf children have that same color hair. Her 2 hearing children do not. And the deaf children were in elementary school on the university campus. So you can go from kindergarten all the way to graduate school right there at Gallaudet. And the wife and the 4 children were waiting for the husband in the cafeteria. And he was trying to tell them, I got to go get my wife and kids. And they were trying to throw him off the campus. First 2, 4, 6, and then 8 officers stopped him. And they were white and black, male and female, and they choked him to death. And the officers were acquitted on criminal charges, and we got a civil settlement that I believe would ensure that those children, their family, a home that would be their own, and a chance at an education or a different life when they came of age. Yeah. So I'm very, very proud of the law and the privilege it's given me to work on a lot of interesting cases. And but the goal has been to not simply succeed myself, but hopefully to help others the way Wiley Branton did for me, and Vernon and Mr. Turo and Mr. Luby and all those people. They were remarkable people. That was the goal. And
Bimini, I think those are great stories.
Well, I'm full of stories, among other things. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you one more for today, though.
Ask me anything.
Okay.
Ask me anything.
So when you go to Beveridge and Diamond, that's the 80s or the Reagan years, right?
Right. That's right.
So I'm curious. Carter's 76. Obviously Nixon before that, and then but the Reagan years. What role? Let's say specifically at Beveridge and Diamond, because that's where you're succeeding and you're doing all these amazing things. What role does politics play at a major law firm like Beveridge and Diamond, whether it's Republican or Democrat, sir?
Well, the smart law firms have both Republican and Democratic ties, right? And in our office, you may recall Washington, D.C. had this art project with elephants and donkeys that were painted. And we had a donkey, but we needed to make certain we got an elephant too, because we wanted people to know that we had friends on both sides of the aisle. That was a tough time. Ironically, you may recall the Reagan years was during the savings and loan crisis developed there.
Yes, okay.
And one of the first major cases that I got on my own came to me through a Black woman who worked at the FDIC. And I remember she called me and she said, Ben, this is Cassandra. And I was trying to figure out who's Cassandra. And she had a familiar tone to her voice. And she told me her last name. And then I realized that we'd been to one of these rubber chicken dinners where the chicken tastes like rubber. And afterwards, we had dessert, and I had chocolate. She had vanilla, and so I reminded her of that. And she was from Montgomery, and I'm from Jackson, so we had the Deep South in common. But she says, we have one of these savings and loan cases, and I'd like you to take it. And I said, well, I don't want to go through all this trouble if it's not open. She said, it's open, and I'm the one who decides. We got that work, and that was a real opportunity. She trusted me. She gave me a chance. Mm-hmm. I had the privilege of my senior partner came to me, and New Orleans had elected a new mayor, and we were doing a little work for them, and they were switching out all their council, much as my firm had got switched out, remember, in the Puerto Rico work. And he says, who do we know? And so I knew the mayor's father, but he was deceased. I knew a federal judge. He was no longer on the bench. But I called a friend. He says, I don't know anybody, but my wife's the city attorney. And she gave me that chance. I still work for that client today, almost 30 years ago. Another. So there's so many stories. I could talk you into submission, but
so politics is about you said it's about working, in essence, working both sides of the aisle.
Well, that's part of it, but I think the main thing is there has to be substance. Can you do the work? Yes. And then, do you care about the work? And then the client wants to know, do you care about me? It was that famous lawyer, Maya Angelou, who said, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. Mm-hmm. She, of course, was not a lawyer, but a great writer and poet, and she's right. And so my deal was, how do I show somebody I care? And I tell a little bit of a joke, but Denzel Washington once made a movie in our neighborhood, and my wife and the middle-aged women made cookies for Denzel. And I'll ask the young people, why didn't my wife run off with Denzel? And they blush. And they say, she loves you. I said, nah. She has a great life. I said, nah. So the answer is he doesn't care about her, and I do. If he did, I might have been in trouble. And think about it. Look at him and look at me. Who's more fun? Who's got more money? Who's smart? Who's better looking? But the answer is he can't outcare me. And how do you show somebody you care? When they're have a success, you're their biggest cheerleader. Yeah. When they're going through life's great changes, loss of someone they love, a problem with a child, you're there for them, and you help them succeed. And I hope I've done that.
Yeah. So jumping forward to today.
Yes.
Do you, in terms of, again, navigating politics, is it more difficult now to navigate with the climate that we're in then?
Well, it depends on what we're talking about. So I think my mental outlook was I need to succeed no matter who's in office, right? I need to find a way to be successful. You know, it's kind of like you don't allow the rain to affect you or the snow. You just do your job. And now, politics are extremely important. If we don't vote, we won't get the change that we want. And indeed, we can get people in office who go out of their way. They're not simply different in political views, but they have a malevolent view toward others. So politics matters, and make no mistake about it. And voting matters. And that's the most important thing a citizen can do.
Yes, sir.
And it's your way of sending your message. But in the end, one can still succeed. So in my little corner of the world, on environmental end, some presidents are lax in their enforcement, or they may be facilitating projects. Well, you've got to find a way to help your clients do that. Other different administrations may be aggressive in their enforcement. So that requires a different type of skill.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to separate out. My job is to fulfill the interests of my clients in every ethical and appropriate way. Now, my personal politics, that's different, right? And but I've seen the difference politics can make and laws can make. When I was 12 years old, they turned the dogs and the hoses on those children in Birmingham, 1963 in the spring. And in that summer in June, Medgar Evers was murdered in my hometown of Jackson, Mississippi. That fall in 1963, again in Birmingham, the 4 little girls were killed in the bombing blast. And the summer of 1964, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Mickey Schwerner were found buried in an earthen dam. But in 1964, we got the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And the following year, after the March on Selma, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. If you don't have the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, you don't get to Barack Obama. You don't get to Joe Biden. You don't get to Kamala Harris. You don't get a lot of that change.
Yes.
And so people who could not vote, who were mistreated and were thought to be too timid to vote, risked their lives. And they made those changes. So respectfully, the real heroes are those nameless people lost to history.
Yes, sir.
Who did what was right. And so I have huge respect for them. No one talks about the parents of Ruby Bridges, the little girl who I talked about earlier in the Norman Rockwell picture, who integrated the New Orleans schools. What made them different? Why did they do that?
Yeah.
You know, and so I'm somebody like Vernon Damer, who had the temerity to insist that Black people vote, and they burned his store, burned his house down, shot him, killed him. His wife and children were able to get away. He held them off so they could get away. There are all these people that did remarkable things that are forgotten. And as I was mentioning about Arthur Shores or Scipio Spinks, who Wiley knew of, and I knew nothing about them, he had a way of keeping their memories alive. And I hope I will do the same for those, not me, but those who are real heroes. And so that's what I think.
Yeah, well, no, thank you, sir. It's always a privilege to talk to you, get your insights and your experiences, and reminding us of all those who have come before us. So thank you very much for that, sir.
This is the Black Experience for all.
If you like what you hear at the Black Experience, please consider clicking on the join button to support our nonprofit. I'm Adam P. Kennedy. Thank you for joining us.